Wade's revenge domain. Maybe it's time to consider transition planning, Wade. Brad Coleman didn't even look up when he said it. His fingers were busy organizing papers on his mahogany desk, making sure every corner aligned perfectly. We were sitting in Conference Room B at Medical Dynamics Corporation, the one with the broken thermostat and that persistent smell of industrial disinfectant that never quite left the building. I'm Wade Peterson, 54 years old, and I've been keeping medical devices from killing people for 20 years. That Tuesday morning, I thought I was just going to another routine performance review. Turns out, I was about to learn exactly what 2 decades of preventing patient deaths was worth to these people. Brad slid a document across the polished table. His Rolex caught the LED lighting. Probably cost more than my monthly house payment. This outlines your updated role structure for the upcoming reorganization. He said in that practiced HR tone they perfect after years of delivering career-ending news. I looked down at the paper, Senior Technical Advisor, 20-year service record. Salary adjustment 1.2%. Below that, in smaller print like they hoped I wouldn't notice, role realignment with organizational modernization initiatives. I'd seen that corporate doublespeak before. Translation: we've decided what you're worth and your opinion doesn't matter. 1.2%, I said quietly. Correct. That aligns with budget constraints for legacy technical positions. Legacy positions, I leaned back in that uncomfortable chair. 20 years of FDA inspections, device recalls I'd prevented, patient safety protocols I'd written from scratch. Legacy. Like I was some outdated piece of equipment they couldn't quite justify scrapping yet. What about Quincy? Brad's pen stopped moving for half a second. Then he forced that painful-looking smile they teach in management seminars. I'm not sure what you're asking. Quincy Morrison, the new VP of Engineering. Started 8 months ago. The smile got tighter. I can't discuss another employee's compensation package. Wade, you understand. He's making nearly double my salary, isn't he? Brad set his pen down carefully, buying time to formulate his response. Quincy brings different qualifications to the organization. MBA from Northwestern. Strategic vision that aligns with executive growth objectives. I let those words hang there for a moment. Different qualifications. In medical devices, qualifications meant you could spot a calibration drift before it killed someone. You either understood biocompatibility testing or you didn't. You could read an FDA warning letter and know exactly what needed fixing, or you couldn't. There wasn't an MBA program that taught you how to prevent cardiac monitor failures during surgery. And I have 20 years of building every safety protocol this company uses, I said evenly. I've personally prevented at least a dozen major recalls that could have killed patients and destroyed our reputation. I've saved this company millions in FDA penalties and litigation costs. But Quincy has an MBA, so that's worth twice as much. Different roles command different market rates, Brad said, his voice taking on that careful HR neutrality. Leadership positions are benchmarked against external compensation data. So keeping patients alive is worth half what a business degree is worth, even when that business degree comes with zero understanding of how our devices actually work. Wade, I understand you're frustrated. I'm not frustrated. I interrupted. I'm clarifying, because it sounds like you're telling me that someone with zero understanding of FDA regulations, zero experience with biocompatibility testing, and zero contribution to actual patient safety is worth twice what I am. I just want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly. Brad folded his hands on the table. Professional, controlled, unmoved by logic or patient welfare concerns. We benchmark compensation against market data. Executive roles command premium compensation. Credentials matter. Translation: know your place. I thought about my daughter Sarah's cancer treatment bills, $180,000 over 2 years that insurance barely touched. I thought about the mortgage payments, $2,800 monthly on a house I'd planned to have paid off by retirement. I thought about my 401k that had taken a beating in the last market correction, the healthcare premiums that kept climbing, the fact that I was 54 years old with maybe 11 good earning years left. Then I reached into my briefcase. Brad tensed slightly, probably expecting legal documents or union paperwork. Instead, I pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded once, and placed it on top of his reorganization document. My resignation letter? His eyes dropped to it, and I watched the color drain from his face as he read the first line. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position as Chief Engineering Manager at Medical Dynamics Corporation, Wade. He started, voice cracking slightly. I emailed a copy to your inbox at 10:47 a.m. I said calmly, You'll see it along with copies to my direct reports, the VP of Operations, and the FDA Liaison Coordinator. He blinked at the signature, at the date, at words that couldn't be negotiated away or revised in committee. You don't need to make this decision right now. This is significant. Talk to Alan Rodriguez. Sleep on it. We can revisit the compensation structure. I've been sleeping on it for 20 years, I said, standing up. This is me waking up. Brad opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for oxygen. But you told me to consider transition planning, I said, picking up my briefcase. So I did, and my transition plan is somewhere else. I left the resignation letter on the table and walked out. The soft click of the conference room door closing behind me was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in months. Let me back up and tell you how a quiet, underpaid engineering manager and one condescending sentence about transition planning turned into the most expensive 4 hours in medical dynamics history. My name is Wade Peterson. I'm 54 years old, divorced father of 2 grown kids. I don't have an MBA from Northwestern. I don't have connections in the C-suite. What I have is a mechanical engineering degree from State, 6 years working aircraft maintenance in the Air Force, and 20 years of institutional knowledge about medical device manufacturing, so complex that it required constant vigilance just to keep patients safe. The military shaped everything about how I approach problems. When you're responsible for keeping F-16 avionics operational in combat conditions, you learn that lives depend on systems working exactly as designed. You don't get to blame someone else when navigation systems fail during a mission. You don't get to make excuses when communication equipment malfunctions in hostile airspace. You fix it, document what went wrong, and make sure it never happens again. That discipline served me well when I started at Medical Dynamics in 2004, right after I finished my degree on the GI Bill. Back then, they were a mid-size medical device manufacturer trying to compete with companies 10 times their size. On paper, they produced cardiac monitoring systems for hospitals and surgical centers. In reality, they ran a collection of manufacturing processes held together with outdated quality protocols, manual inspections, and the desperate prayers of 2 overworked engineers. The company had contracts with major hospital systems across the Midwest. Their cardiac monitors tracked heart rhythms during surgery, detected arrhythmias in ICU patients, and provided life-critical data to emergency room physicians. When those devices failed, people died. It was that simple. My interview was with Alan Rodriguez, the VP of Engineering at the time, who'd built his career on actual technical work before getting promoted into management. He understood that medical device safety wasn't just about passing inspections and hoping for the best. "Can you keep our FDA compliance from falling apart?" he asked, gesturing at a whiteboard covered in process flow diagrams that looked more like a disaster plan than a quality system. "Depends," I said. "Can I actually fix problems, or will I just be documenting failures? If you can justify the changes," he said, "you can implement them." He hired me that afternoon. For the first month, I just observed, sat in on quality meetings, read incident reports, traced manufacturing workflows, talked to technicians who'd been there long enough to know where all the problems were buried. The pattern was clear. Reactive management, no preventive monitoring, and documentation that was either missing or dangerously outdated. The second month, I started documenting failure patterns, not theoretical risks, but actual failures that had happened. Every time something broke, I wrote it down. What failed, why it failed, what the warning signs were, whether the fix actually prevented recurrence. I kept a physical logbook because digital documentation has a way of disappearing when budgets get tight or priorities shift. By the third month, I'd identified 18 critical vulnerabilities in our manufacturing process. I documented them, quantified the patient risk, estimated the cost to fix versus the cost of an FDA recall. When I presented it to Alan, he asked the only question that mattered: how much to fix all of this? 18 months of dedicated work, I said, and the authority to override shortcuts when marketing wants faster delivery. You have both, he said. I rebuilt the quality control system first because you can't prevent what you can't measure. Created monitoring protocols that showed not just whether devices passed inspection, but how close they were to failure. Calibration drift patterns, component degradation rates, process variation trends, all the early warning indicators that let you prevent disasters instead of just responding to them. Then I rebuilt the FDA compliance protocols properly. Real traceability, automated documentation, comprehensive validation testing. By the end of year 1, we had actual visibility into our manufacturing quality. By year 2, I'd trained 5 quality technicians on proper incident response. By year 3, I was the person everyone called when inspectors showed up. Not because I was officially responsible for FDA relations, but because I was the only one who'd seen these specific compliance patterns before. I became the institutional memory nobody wanted to admit they depended on, and for a while, that worked. The company grew. We added more hospital contracts, more complexity. Revenue increased from $75 million to $220 million during my tenure. The board was happy. Executives got their bonuses. I got a 2.8% raise and a coffee mug that said Quality Champion. I didn't complain, not because I didn't care, but because I believed eventually competence would be recognized. Good work would be rewarded. Loyalty would be returned. That was my first mistake. The shift started 2 years ago when Medical Dynamics decided it needed to modernize its leadership infrastructure. That was the phrase used by the new CEO. Victor Hayes, former pharmaceutical executive brought in by the board to optimize operational efficiency. Victor loved words like synergize and digital transformation and strategic optimization. He did not love words like regulatory compliance or validation testing, or that's going to fail inspection if we don't address it properly. Within 6 months of Victor taking over, the company started hiring differently. Less emphasis on people who understood how things worked. More emphasis on people who could make things sound impressive in board presentations. We got directors with MBAs who'd never calibrated a medical device. We got VPs who could discuss driving operational excellence, but couldn't explain what biocompatibility testing actually measured. We got consultants billing $400 an hour to tell us we should leverage lean manufacturing paradigms, and we got Quincy Morrison, MBA from Northwestern, 4 years at a strategy consulting firm, 0 medical device background. His title? VP of Engineering. His job? Align engineering initiatives with business objectives and drive modernization of legacy manufacturing processes. Translation: make everything sound efficient in PowerPoint while people like me did the actual work. I discovered the pay disparity by accident, and it hit me like a physical blow. I was looking for a calibration report Owen Mitchell had promised to upload when I clicked the wrong file. Quincy Morrison's offer letter. Base salary $175,000. Signing bonus $30,000. Annual bonus target 25%. Stock options 18,000 shares. I stared at those numbers for a long time. Then I opened my most recent pay stub. Base salary $94,200. No signing bonus. Annual bonus target 3%, which I'd received exactly once in 20 years. Stock options 2,000 shares from my original offer. Nothing since. 8 months at the company, 0 medical device knowledge, 0 patients saved from device failures, making 86% more than I was. The math was simple, and it was devastating. I closed both files and sat there in my cubicle for a very long time, listening to the hum of manufacturing equipment that I'd spent 2 decades keeping properly calibrated. That evening, I went home to my empty house and did something I hadn't done in 8 years. I updated my resume, really updated it. Not just the annual courtesy refresh for HR files. I documented every major system I'd built, every recall I'd prevented, every protocol I'd written that saved lives or prevented FDA violations. The list was longer than I expected. The cardiac monitor recall I'd prevented in 2018 by catching calibration drift patterns. The biocompatibility testing overhaul that kept us compliant when new FDA requirements hit in 2020. The quality management system that reduced defect rates by 73% while catching 41% more actual problems. The manufacturing process improvements that prevented 3 potential Class I recalls. I sent my resume to 2 recruiters I'd been politely declining for years. Within 36 hours, my phone was ringing. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 serious offers. Within 3 weeks, I'd accepted one. VP of Product Safety at Biotech Solutions, $165,000 base salary, 20% bonus target, real stock options with a company going public next year. All I needed was the right moment to leave Medical Dynamics. Brad Coleman gave it to me. By 11:15 a.m., my security badge had been deactivated. By 11:23 a.m., my system access was being revoked across all manufacturing databases. By 11:35 a.m., I'd cleared my desk, boxed up my calibration tools and the coffee mug that said Quality Champion, and walked past 3 colleagues who suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. By 11:47 a.m., I was in my car driving home. By 2:30 p.m., the first critical alert started screaming. Here's what most people don't understand about medical device manufacturing. It's not like assembling cars where you can see what's broken. It's more like brain surgery, interconnected processes that depend on each other in ways that aren't always obvious. When something goes wrong, the symptoms can show up anywhere. And finding the root cause requires knowing how all the pieces fit together. I'd been that institutional knowledge for 20 years. Every unusual calibration requirement, every undocumented process dependency, every workaround that had become critical manufacturing protocol, it was all in my head, backed up by that physical logbook I kept locked in my desk drawer. The logbook they didn't know existed. By 2:45 p.m., every quality technician in the building was in crisis mode. The cardiac monitor production line was throwing cascading errors. Not complete shutdown, that would have been obvious. Instead, it was degrading slowly, producing devices that passed basic inspection but failed advanced validation testing. Owen Mitchell, the junior engineer I'd been mentoring, was on duty. Poor kid was 27 years old with 20 months of experience, suddenly responsible for manufacturing processes he'd only seen from the outside. He checked the standard operating procedures I'd written 4 years ago, but the SOPs covered normal failure modes. This wasn't normal. What was happening was a calibration drift in the signal processing circuit triggered by a specific combination of temperature variations and component aging. I'd seen it exactly once before, 16 months earlier during a particularly humid summer when our HVAC system was failing. I documented the solution in my logbook, along with the environmental monitoring protocols needed to detect it early. The logbook that was now sitting on my kitchen table, Owen escalated to Karen Walsh, our senior quality engineer. Karen was sharp, dedicated, with 7 years of experience, but she'd never seen this particular failure mode because I'd fixed it quietly the last time, implemented some preventive monitoring, and moved on to the next crisis. Karen did everything right. She pulled error logs, examined test data, looked for patterns. She could see the symptoms. Validation failure rates climbing, device performance parameters drifting, quality metrics degrading, but she couldn't see the cause. At 3:20 p.m., Quincy Morrison walked into the quality lab. In my mind, I could picture him perfectly. Pressed slacks, button-down shirt, that slight smile that said he was about to solve everything with business process optimization. "Why is the production dashboard showing red?" he asked. "We're investigating a quality issue with the cardiac monitor line," Karen replied, not looking up from her diagnostic equipment. "Investigating doesn't help our delivery schedule. Can't we just recalibrate the test equipment?" I can only imagine the look Karen gave him. In medical device manufacturing, just recalibrate is like a surgeon saying just cut it out without knowing what it is. You can make things catastrophically worse very quickly. We need to identify the root cause first, Karen said. If we recalibrate without understanding the problem, we could mask a serious quality defect or create validation failures in shipped devices. How long will that take? I don't know. This isn't a standard failure pattern. Quincy pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Victor." Victor Hayes arrived 12 minutes later. I knew him well enough to picture his reaction, the carefully controlled expression that meant he was calculating financial damage. The way he'd scan the room to identify who he could blame if this became a regulatory problem. "Where's Wade?" he asked. The question I'd been waiting for. "He resigned this morning," Quincy said. "Over a compensation disagreement. I would have paid money to see Victor's face in that moment. You let him walk today." "I didn't let him do anything." Quincy said defensively he made an irrational decision. Victor left immediately. I know because at exactly 2:47 p.m., 4 hours after I'd placed that resignation letter on Brad's desk. Victor Hayes was standing on my front porch, knocking on my door like someone whose entire world was collapsing. Which, technically it was. "Wade," he said when I opened the door. "No pleasantries, no small talk. We need you back immediately." I looked at him through the screen door. His normally perfect suit was wrinkled, tie loosened, hair disheveled. This was a man who prided himself on control, on having backup plans for backup plans. Seeing him rattled was almost worth 20 years of being undervalued. Almost. "I don't work there anymore," I said. "I know, but our cardiac monitor line is completely down. We've got hospital orders we can't fill. The FDA liaison is asking questions. Nobody can figure out what's wrong. That sounds like your problem, not mine." His jaw clenched. "Wade, please. Just for today. We'll pay you consulting rates, whatever you want." I shook my head slowly. "No. Why not?" "Because 4 hours ago, your company made it very clear what I'm worth to them. So now you get to learn what your manufacturing processes are worth without me." I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Victor knocked 3 more times, each series more desperate than the last. Then I heard his footsteps retreating down my walkway, probably back to his car, back to a crisis that was getting worse by the hour. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down to review my employment contract with Biotech Solutions. The crisis lasted 9 hours. I didn't watch it happen in real time, but I heard about it later from Karen, who called me that evening after everything had finally stabilized. Here's what I missed. By 4:30 p.m., production had stopped completely. The validation failures had cascaded into a full manufacturing shutdown when 3 devices that had passed initial inspection failed catastrophically during final testing. By 6 p.m., Victor had called in Advanced Manufacturing Solutions, an emergency consulting firm that specialized in medical device crisis recovery. The lead consultant spent 5 hours examining our processes and finally admitted what everyone already knew. Without the original process architect, this could take days or weeks to fully understand and stabilize. Victor looked at Cliff Turner, the current VP of Operations who'd replaced Alan Rodriguez when Alan took early retirement. You're telling me we're completely helpless because one engineer quit. I'm telling you we're helpless because we treated that engineer like he didn't matter, Cliff said, and now we're learning what happens when he's not here to save us. The consulting firm worked through the night. They brought in 4 specialists, set up a crisis management center, and started systematically going through every aspect of our manufacturing process. At $500 per hour per consultant, the bill was climbing towards $75,000 before they'd even identified the problem. The breakthrough came at 11:40 p.m. when Owen finally remembered something I'd mentioned casually 8 months earlier. There was an old technical memo buried in our document control system, something I'd written after a similar incident years ago. It took him 3 hours to find it. Environmental impact on signal processing calibration, critical manufacturing dependencies. It had everything. The temperature-humidity interaction, the specific monitoring parameters, the exact sequence of recalibration steps needed to recover without triggering secondary failures. I'd written it 16 months ago after the last time this happened, and nobody had read it until they had no choice. Owen followed my documentation step by step. It worked. Production stabilized. The consultants packed up and sent a bill for $89,000. The crisis was over, but the real damage was just beginning. What happened next unfolded over 6 months, and I watched it from the comfortable distance of my new position at Biotech Solutions. Within 2 weeks, the FDA launched an investigation into medical dynamics quality management practices. The inspection found concerning gaps in institutional knowledge management and personnel retention strategies. Translation: they'd noticed that Medical Dynamics had let their most experienced quality engineer walk out the door during active manufacturing operations. Within a month, 2 major hospital contracts worth $38 million were suspended pending quality system review. The purchasing managers had lost confidence in Medical Dynamics' ability to ensure consistent device reliability. Victor called an emergency board meeting. 5 executives were asked to pursue other opportunities. Quincy Morrison was quietly transferred to a strategic planning role with no budget and no staff. Brad Coleman was terminated for organizational efficiency, though everyone knew it was because he'd managed to lose the most valuable employee in the company over a $25,000 salary difference. Cliff Turner reached out to me 5 weeks after the incident. Professional email, carefully worded. He offered $14,500 base salary, 18% annual bonus, title upgrade to Director of Quality Systems, direct reporting to him instead of through the management layer. I know we failed you, the email said. I'm asking for a chance to make it right. I read it twice, then responded, I appreciate the offer. But I've already started at my new company. I'm happy here. I hope you can rebuild your quality systems successfully, because I was happy. Biotech Solutions was everything Medical Dynamics wasn't. The CEO, Dr. Helen Foster, had spent 12 years doing actual research and development before moving into executive leadership. She understood that medical device safety wasn't a business problem you could optimize with strategic planning and cost reduction. What's the worst quality failure you ever prevented? She asked during my final interview. I told her about the cardiac monitor recall I'd stopped in 2018. How I'd tracked the calibration drift through multiple manufacturing lots and identified the root cause before any defective devices reached patients. She nodded slowly. If you join us, that kind of knowledge won't exist only in someone's personal notes. It'll be documented, shared, and built into our institutional processes. We've learned that talented people leave companies. When they do, we need to make sure the organization retains what they knew. Starting salary $165,000, bonus target 20%. Stock options, 12,000 shares in a company going public within 18 months. But more than the money, it was respect. On my first day, Helen introduced me to the engineering team. This is Wade Peterson. He's joining us as VP of Product Safety. He has more real-world regulatory experience than most of us combined. When he tells you something about compliance or quality, listen, because he's earned that authority through 20 years of keeping patients safe. No qualifiers. No, he's just a technical person. Just respect. Within 6 months, I'd rebuilt their quality monitoring infrastructure using everything I'd learned at Medical Dynamics, but properly documented this time. Within a year, I'd trained 4 other engineers to handle major incidents independently, not because I was trying to make myself replaceable, but because I was building something sustainable. When my first annual review came up, Helen called me into her office. You've exceeded every expectation we had. We're promoting you to Senior VP of Regulatory Affairs. Base salary increases to $185,000. You're getting the full 20% bonus, and the board approved an additional retention grant of 8,000 stock options. I haven't even been here a year, I said. Exactly. We don't wait until you're walking out the door to recognize what you're worth. We do it while you're here, before someone else tries to recruit you. 6 months later, I got an email from Victor Hayes, subject line, consulting opportunity. Medical Dynamics was still struggling. They'd hired 2 different quality engineers to replace me. Both had left within 12 months. The institutional knowledge I'd carried was still missing, and they were losing contracts because of it. They wanted to bring me in as an external consultant for quarterly quality audits and knowledge transfer sessions. The proposed rate, $350 per hour, 6-month contract, estimated 160 hours. Total value $56,000. For context, that was more than half my entire annual bonus had been at Medical Dynamics. For 160 hours of part-time work. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I called Helen. My old company wants to hire me as a consultant. What do you think? Do you want to help them? Part of me wants to say no on principle. Part of me thinks maybe they've actually learned something. If they're willing to pay you what you're worth now, and they've genuinely changed how they treat people, then maybe it's worth helping them. Not because they deserve it, but because you'll know you took the high road. I did the consulting. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to see if they'd actually learned anything. The first session was with the executive team. Victor, Cliff, the new board chair, I presented one slide, the real cost of undervaluing technical expertise. I walked them through the incident. What had failed, why it had failed, why someone with an MBA and no manufacturing background couldn't have prevented it, why someone with 20 years of institutional knowledge could have. Then I showed them the financial impact. $38 million in lost contracts, $9.7 million in crisis response costs, $4.8 million in regulatory compliance. Reputational damage that was still affecting new business development. Total. Over $52 million, all because they'd refused to pay me an extra $25,000 per year. The return on investment of undervaluing expertise, I said, was negative 208,000%. Victor stared at the slide for a long time. We made a catastrophic mistake. Yes, you did. How do we make sure this never happens again? I spent the next 3 hours teaching them what biotech had taught me. How to value technical expertise, document institutional knowledge, build systems for retention rather than replacement. Today, I'm still at Biotech Solutions. After our IPO last year, I'm now Senior VP of Regulatory Affairs, the highest technical position in the company. I make $195,000 base salary. My bonus last year was $42,000. My stock options are worth approximately $680,000 at current market value. But more than the money, I have something Medical Dynamics never gave me: respect. When I say something's going to cause regulatory problems, people listen. When I document a quality risk, it becomes mandatory reading. When I suggest we need to slow down and do something properly, nobody tells me to consider transition planning, because my position is exactly where expertise should be, at the table, with a voice, being heard. Here's the lesson. When someone tells you to consider transition planning, believe them. They're showing you exactly how much they value you. You can stay and hope things change, or you can leave and let them learn what you are worth. Sometimes it's not about revenge. Sometimes it's just about respect. And when the CEO is knocking on your door 4 hours later, begging you to come back, that's not victory. That's just confirmation that you were right all along. Your expertise doesn't become more valuable the moment you walk away. It was always that valuable. The difference is that some organizations need to lose what they can't afford to lose before they learn to value what they should have treasured. The companies that thrive understand the difference between replacing people and replacing knowledge. One is impossible, the other is just expensive.